foundational to the well-being of our city. As we've seen in recent years, the lack of available and affordable housing threatens the stability of our communities and curbs our full potential as a society. I know from firsthand experience what it's like to go without housing. No one should ever have to experience homelessness, and this experience is what fuels my commitment to secure housing for every New Yorker. Most of you know that I've spent a few rounds in public shelter here in New York City, and then my family was the recipient of public housing, and we benefited from Section 8. I mean, I've pretty much had every subsidy under the sun, as have many, of my friends and family members, and really being able to have that peace of mind of knowing that we had an affordable, safe place to live allowed me personally to be able to do other things without the worry of where I was going to sleep that night. So to preserve our great city, we need to make sure that working people can afford to live and contribute to the city that they love. We've got to build more housing and make sure that we do so in a responsible and equitable manner. This means that every district must contribute to solving our city's housing crisis, and every district must do their fair share to develop housing and solve this housing crisis. Speaker Adams' Fair Housing Framework addresses this issue by requiring the development of five-year housing production targets for every community district in the city, including for low-income affordable housing, supportive housing, and senior housing. These targets are a floor, not a ceiling, for what the district's obligation is to address this crisis. We all have an equal stake in solving this. As a council, we are doubling down on addressing this crisis head-on. Speaker Adams' Fair Housing Framework is an important bill that will advance our collective efforts to produce what New Yorkers need, and I am proud to support its passage. Thank you, and now I'd like to give the floor to my speaker, Speaker Adams.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to my anchor, my deputy speaker, the Honorable Diana Ayala, for that gracious introduction. Today, we will vote on my Fair Housing Framework legislation, among many other important bills. As Speaker, I have the honor of leading the first women majority and most diverse council in our city's history. Our representation comes with a responsibility to prioritize the needs of New Yorkers and communities that have been overlooked for far too long. We arrived at this moment together to confront one of our city's biggest challenges, the housing and affordability crisis. I want to give special thanks to our council leaders on housing for their leadership and collaboration on this bill, including Housing and Buildings Chair Pirina Sanchez, Land Use Chair Rafael Salamanca, and Zoning and Franchises Chair Kevin Riley, as well as council members Sean Abreu, Amanda Farias, Shahana Hanif, Carlina Rivera, Althea Stevens, and all of my colleagues standing with me and beside me. I'm so proud that this legislation has 36 co-sponsors, with broad support amongst council members from every borough and representing practically every corner of our diverse city. The breadth of support demonstrates the scale of the crisis we're facing and that this council understands the importance of addressing it together. I also want to acknowledge the advocates whose work over the years has helped to push the city alleviate the city's affordability and housing challenges, and whose support is critical to the success of our efforts. Barika Williams and the team at ANHD, Brendan Cheney and the New York Housing Conference, Samuel Stein from Community Service Society, and all other organizations present with us today. Of course, I also want to recognize our partners in labor who have also been consistently leading the charge on housing and workers' rights. Candice Tall, Executive Vice President of 32BJ SEIU, and the members of Laborers Local 79, including Robert Brunote. Thank you all for being here this morning. Today, I am proud that we will pass my Fair Housing Framework, a legislative effort to help tackle our city's housing crisis through the lens of equity. This bill will help create a plan to support New Yorkers by building and preserving more housing, ensuring adequate affordability, and improving access to resources and opportunities in every neighborhood. New York City faces a dire housing crisis. Only 200,000 new housing units were built over the past decade, even as our city grew by 630,000 residents and 1 million jobs, underscoring how our rate of housing has not kept pace. This imbalance has affected both new and longtime residents. All of us have felt the pinch of the housing shortage, which has worsened over time, whether directly or indirectly. It has disproportionately burdened those who need affordable housing at the deepest levels. New York City's 2021 Housing and Vacancy Survey revealed that less than 1% of rental apartments below $1,500 per month were vacant. More than half of all New Yorkers are rent burdened, spending more than 30% of their income alone on rent. This is indicative of a systemic failure that requires citywide solutions that we can all contribute to solving. We cannot allow the status quo to continue unabated, as it will hurt every neighborhood in every corner of our city. If we don't address our housing shortage, it will deepen the affordability crisis, worsen homelessness, and push our residents out of the communities that they call home. We need comprehensive solutions that match the urgency of this crisis, and the Council remains fully committed to confronting our housing crisis head-on. There are many solutions we must pursue to address this major challenge. Among them is ensuring that we boost housing production in an equitable way so that every community does their part to produce and preserve affordable housing. There are also certain neighborhoods that have long contributed to our housing growth. We need to support them with the investments they need. That is what the Fair Housing Framework legislation will advance. This legislation sets local housing targets based on equity and our city's needs, with real affordability as a priority. It also addresses the disparities in housing production and investments across all neighborhoods. For too long, we've operated without transparent targets. This has steered public dialogue about housing and land use away from focusing on the objective metrics that can empower stakeholders to effectively tackle this crisis at the local level. We know that every community is different, and housing needs vary across income, age, and other demographics. But some neighborhoods with abundant access to infrastructure and amenities like open space, thriving schools, and public transit have not produced enough housing units. As a result, too many neighborhoods have been able to opt out of building affordable housing, while others have shouldered more of the responsibility and deserve greater investments. It is unacceptable when just one council district, Councilmember Salamanca's District 17 in the Bronx, has produced more affordable housing than 26 other council districts combined over the course of several years. We need every neighborhood to do its fair share to confront our city's housing crisis. Through our collective efforts, we can invest holistically in the strength of our neighborhoods and successfully address the housing crisis. These inequities are what Introduction 1031, My Fair Housing Framework bill, are aimed at addressing. In essence, this legislation can be an important tool of transparency and accountability to help us address the housing crisis and obligations of each community district. It would create 5-year housing production targets for every community district in the city, including for low-income affordable housing, supportive housing, and senior housing. It would also support the preservation of low-income affordable units based on factors such as access to opportunity, displacement risk, as access to displacement risk infrastructure capacity, and vulnerability to climate change. The Fair Housing Framework would also require the development of specific goals and strategies that increase the production and preservation of low-income affordable housing and voucher utilization. It would expand preservation and anti-displacement resources in districts with the highest displacement risks. And it would identify the need for neighborhood investments in underserved communities that have contributed significant housing development. To be successful, we'll need to ensure that resources are allocated accordingly and that we maintain deep levels of community engagement with stakeholders in each district to help us solve our shared challenges. It is possible to meet our citywide housing goals while also meeting the unique needs of each district. Permanent and affordable housing keeps our communities safe. It's also how we can break cycles of homelessness and poverty while advancing safer communities. The issues we face are interconnected, and by investing in equitable housing production, we can ease the stressors that exacerbate other citywide challenges. I'm proud to advance legislation that prioritizes holistic planning, where growth is measured by the metrics of equity, health, and sustainability. At the end of the day, the legislation is about building more housing and uplifting New Yorkers so working families across the 5 boroughs have a real chance at building their legacy in this city. This is the reality that New Yorkers deserve, and one that the Council is determined to realize through our Fair Housing Framework and other efforts. Before I close, I want to thank the Council members and staff for their hard work, especially members of our Planning and Land Use Division, Paris Straughter, Brian Paul, William Vidal, and from the Legislative Division, Andrea Vasquez, Brad Reed, Taylor Zaloni, and Jessica Fung for their hard work on this bill, as well as the many, many housing advocates and labor unions who helped build the foundation upon which the Fair Housing Framework stands. It is my absolute honor to stand with you and for you in this historic moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and we will now hear from Councilmember Pierina Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, for your leadership on fair housing in the City of New York, and to all of our colleagues, our organizations, and the movement of labor for being here today. New York City is in the midst of an ongoing, uneven housing crisis. Half of all New Yorkers, as we know, are rent burdened, contributing 30% or more of their income to rent. And the pain is concentrated in working class, segregated communities of color. It's felt most strongly by persons living with disabilities, sexual and gender minorities, and other vulnerable groups. And in districts like mine, with a median worker earning $24,000 a year, a home health aid worker that is a single mom of maybe 2 or 3 earning that amount, she pays 90% of her income in rent. The housing crisis exists in the context of ongoing deep segregation. Over 80% of white or Black New Yorkers would need to move to a new neighborhood to achieve a more equal racial distribution in our city. New York City is one of the most segregated metropolitan regions in America, following, as we know, a history of government and private sector practices that serve to exclude people of color, low-income people of color, from many neighborhoods. In response, our city has neither built nor preserved enough housing to keep pace with demand, nor have we distributed our limited production fairly across our city. And so we are in a unique moment. As a city, we face a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where the political will and alignment exists to make profound changes to the way that we produce housing. We must approach it carefully, thoughtfully, attentive to our housing goals: equity, desegregation, neighborhood stability, opportunity. The racist policies of the past are not going to address themselves. And that's why today I am so proud to stand in support of the Speaker's Fair Housing Plan legislation. We know our housing policies are far from meeting the needs of our lowest income New Yorkers, but this bill here requiring targets for income restricted and supportive housing at the community district level can get us closer to doing so. Thank you so much, Speaker.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. We'll now hear from the Chair of the Committee on Land Use, Councilmember Rafael Salamanca.
All right, buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. I want to first start by thanking Speaker Adams for this historic framework legislation that will address our city's ever-growing affordable housing crisis. Access to quality affordable housing is one of the most pressing issues New Yorkers are facing today. We're seeing an untenable system where, one, rental prices are soaring for existing units. Two, the rate of new housing units being built are stagnated. And three, the city's population rate has continued to increase, including a rising demand to house incoming migrants. All of this has unfortunately created a disastrous cycle of housing insecurity in New York. When we do see new affordable housing units being approved and built, it has only been in a minority of districts. This is completely unacceptable. My district has probably built the most affordable housing units over the last 10 years. But the South Bronx cannot solve the city's housing affordable crisis alone. And it has become an unfair practice to disproportionately place the burden of doing this in my district, in Diana's district, Altia's district, Perina's district, and low-income communities. It is for this reason that I am immensely grateful to my council colleagues for approving the Speaker's Fair Housing Framework legislation today that will work to finally lift this burden off of their shoulders and our shoulders, our community shoulders. With this bill, a framework for a new and more comprehensive approach of building equitably across the city has been provided and will ensure an increase in affordable housing production in every borough and in every district of our great city. If we truly mean to fix this issue, then it is imperative that everyone pull their weight to provide safe and quality affordable housing for their communities. And with that, I will be remiss if I do not give a big shout out to our partners, 32BJ, the Laborers, Local 79, ANHD, and of course, the New York Housing Conference for their housing tracker. Con eso, que Dios lo bendiga. Gracias.
Thank you, Councilmember Salamanca. We will now hear from the Chair of the Subcommittee on Zoning and Franchises, Councilmember Kevin Riley.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I stand before you today as I represent one of the most diverse group of New York City council members, united in our intensified commitment to address the severe housing crisis gripping New York City. At the forefront of our collective effort from Speaker Adrian Adams' Fair Housing Framework, a pivotal piece of legislation that will drive us toward meeting the crucial need of New Yorkers, it is with immense pride that we stand collectively for passing this framework today. The housing situation in our city has reached a critical juncture, posing increasing challenges for our constituents and neighbors to afford living in their communities they call home. Shockingly, half of all New Yorkers are burdened by rent, allocating a staggering 30% or more of their income to housing. Compounding this issue is the evident shortage of housing in New York, with housing production failing to keep pace with job and population growth. Over the past decade, as Speaker Adams stated, a mere 200,000 housing units have been constructed despite the influx of 630,000 new residents and the creation of 1 million jobs. This crisis disproportionately affects those in dire need of deeply affordable housing. It is imperative that we take decisive action to construct and preserve housing responsibility and equitability, with every district working together to address the city housing crisis. recognizing the diverse needs of neighborhoods based on income, age, and demographics, it is apparent that some communities with ample resources have not done enough. Consequently, less resource-rich communities bear a disproportionate burden of housing production responsibilities, as Council Member and Chair of Land Use Salamanca stated. Speaker Adams' Fair Housing Framework directly addresses the disparity. It mandates DCP to assess and establish 5-year housing production targets for each community district, encompassing low-income affordable housing, supported housing, and most importantly, senior housing. It expands preservation and anti-displacement resources, fostering increased neighborhood investments in underserved communities. This legislation is instrumental in meeting the city's housing needs while ensuring growth that is equitable, sustainable, and backed by necessary investments. I am grateful for the steadfast commitment and partnerships of advocates such as ANHD and New York Housing Conference, as well as the unwavering support from our beloved unions, including 32BJ and Labor Local 79, who play a pivotal role in championing this passage of Intro 1031, ensuring our collective effort for fair housing becomes a reality. Thank you, Speaker Adams, and my council colleagues as we unite in our commitment to enact change to ensure that every New Yorker has a place to call home and that our great city thrives with equitable, sustainable, and shared responsibilities. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the best dressed council member, Councilmember Riley. We will now hear, no offense. No offense. We will now hear from Barika Williams from the Association of Neighborhood and Housing Development, the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Barika Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD. And I want to first just commend the speaker and the council on the steps and what we are about to do here today. ANHD has long called for a more equitable and intentional approach to how we do planning and development here in New York City. We all know what the status quo approach really gets us. It reinforces long-standing patterns of racial and economic inequality, of disparity in where things get developed, how they get developed, and what gets developed. But today's fair housing framework really takes an important step forward towards the goals and presents a clear example of the type of nuanced, holistic planning to development that we really should be seeing and leading here in New York City. It's so important. We heard some of the data points, right? Understanding what that means when 50% of New Yorkers are rent burdened, that means that folks are making the decision to not pay for medical expenses, to not access opportunities for new jobs, to not be able to invest in things like workforce development and educational opportunities or childcare, all of which we know are so critical and essential to moving our city forward day by day, week by week. And so what the speaker has really done and led here, and what the council has led here is an understanding that our housing crisis needs to be shared across all of New York City's neighborhoods. We have to have a solution that is not concentrated in just Chair Salamanca's district, right? We can't say that the responsibility of solving this is going to be handled by a few districts here or there. And I want to point everybody to an ANHD report in 2021 that we did titled "Not All Housing Units Are Created Equal," which highlights and puts numbers behind the fact that the vast majority of our affordable housing units have been developed in communities of color, in immigrant communities, and low-income communities. These are the neighborhoods that have been bearing this responsibility for decades, and this is an opportunity and really a step forward in saying we are going to change what that looks like. I also want to applaud and really lift up what the council has done here in the framework of not just saying we're going to count any housing unit, but specifying that we're looking at affordability, we're looking at supportive housing units, and we're also looking at displacement, because all of these things really come together to matter in terms of people being able to stay in their communities, thrive in their communities, and stay in their homes. So we look forward to this. As Deputy Speaker Ayala said, this is a first step and it's a floor. And so it is something that we all can then hold each other to and build on. But I just, on behalf of ANHD and all the work, want to applaud the council and look forward to continuing to move forward housing and development equity here in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you, Barika. We will now hear from Brandon Cheney from the New York Housing Conference, Director of Policy and Operations.
All right, I want to thank Speaker Adams, Land Use Chair Salamanca, Housing and Buildings Chair Sanchez, General Welfare Chair Ayala for their leadership on this issue. This legislation will hold the city accountable to housing goals and ensure our housing supply is shared equitably across the city. My name is Brendan Cheney, Director of Policy and Operations at the New York Housing Conference. We're a nonprofit affordable housing policy and advocacy organization. When we launched our New York City Housing Tracker 2 years ago, we found that affordable housing production is not shared equitably across the city. From 2014 to 2022, 16 council districts produced more than 2,000 units of new affordable housing, while 17 districts produced fewer than 400 units over that time. In fact, the top 5 districts that produced the most affordable housing units produced almost 4 times as many units as the bottom 25 districts combined. So our data shows that Speaker Adams' fair housing legislation is desperately needed because many neighborhoods are not approving housing on their own. We are grateful for the Speaker's leadership. This forward-looking legislation will show what we need and where we need it and push everyone to work to achieve that goal. And then the next step will be to set policy that allows for housing growth across the city in all neighborhoods. Thank you.
And last but not least, before we get to Q&A, we will now hear from the Executive Vice President of 32BJ SEIU, Ms. Candace Tall.
Good morning. Again, my name is Candace Toll. I'm the Executive Vice President of 32BJ and its Political Director. I'm thrilled to be here this morning on behalf of our union to show support for Speaker Adams' Fair Housing Framework. I'm especially thrilled to be standing along such strong allies in the council, as well as our brothers and sisters from local laborers 79. 32BJ fights every day of every year to win and defend the best contracts with the best wages, benefits, and working conditions that we can. And like many others of our sisters and brothers in labor, the city cannot function without labor. During the darkest days in our city, during the height of the COVID pandemic, our members weren't able to stay home. They went to work. But while our members worked through one crisis, another one continued to grow. One that's been growing for generations and will not end without bold action, and that is the affordable housing crisis. Simply put, at 32BJ, we say, if working people cannot find safe, affordable, and comfortable places to live and raise their families, we are failing them as a city. We are here today because Speaker Adams is saying loud and clear that that is unacceptable. Our council allies here are saying that is unacceptable. Our community and our labor partners are saying this is unacceptable. Speaker Adams' Fair Housing Framework is an important and bold step that shines a light on where we can and will build more housing. She is looking at this opportunity to build new housing holistically and through an equity lens, which we greatly support. We are proud to be here today standing in support of the Speaker's agenda and to confront this crisis and take this big step towards addressing it. Thank you.
Okay, we will now open up the floor for Q&A.
Today on the legislation on affordable housing only. Nathan first.
Hi, Speaker, could you just explain, like on a practical level, without any enforcement mechanisms, how the growth targets are going to result in more construction in different neighborhoods? Is the idea that the mayoral administration will sort of take them into account, or that neighborhoods themselves are going to be sort of shamed into building more? And I have a second question after that.
Thank you for the question. Well, you know, the purpose of this legislation certainly is not to shame any community into doing the right thing. It's everybody's responsibility. Our main theme here, one of them, is that we want for all of our communities to be involved with this. We don't want people to feel that they are pushed away, that people aren't listening to their concerns. So part of this legislation really entails bringing the community into the room where this information is shared, where proposals are shared, where ideas are shared, so that we understand, so that the council members understand what it is that their districts are looking for, what it is that their districts want and need, and at the same time, exchanging the information with them, the relevance, the significance, and the importance that everyone is involved with housing. It's going to take everybody to get us out of this crisis, and it is going to be incumbent upon the council members in each district, myself included, to explain the importance of this legislation and the importance of the need for everyone to be involved in housing equitably.
Somewhat on topic, but just that this council has been very focused on equity, and that's at the core of this. Is there an overarching concern that paying for these proposals that are about equity will become more difficult in the coming months as PEG after PEG is expected to roll out, with the date being tomorrow for the next big round of cuts?
Thank you for the question. It certainly is a concern. The finance of New York City is always a concern. We are going to have to prioritize the needs of New Yorkers, or there will be no grand New York to be proud of, plain and simple. This legislation is intentional in continuing the legacy of the greatness of New York. We have got to have housing for New Yorkers. We have to have places for New Yorkers to live. Prioritizing affordable housing for New Yorkers has to be at the top of the list. And again, as the Deputy Speaker says, this is just the floor. We've got a long way to go when it comes to creating this vision and realizing this vision. So yes, the financing is important, but the prioritization of getting this done is important.
Are you open to looking at housing growth mandates for every council district? Do you think that has a role here?
You know, a part of the legislation is not mandates per se, but taking a look at, again, the needs, the specific needs of the districts. The council members are going to be able to determine that with the community's input, with the civics input, with the community board's input, with the residents' input. So we're not necessarily looking at mandates per se, but we are looking at certain standards per community as far as what the needs of the community is, and only the council members in the community are going to be able to determine that.
This plan emphasizes local housing goals and making sure high opportunity neighborhoods are weight. By contrast, the housing component of the Mayor's City of Yes plan proposes creating a little bit more in every district. Can you talk about how those two proposals work in relation to each other, and do they really work together?
Our hope is that they work together. Our legislation is a bit different, but we hope that the proposals will work together. That is the goal. There are going to be differences, of course. I'm going to hearken back to the voices of the community, and we are going to be listening very carefully to what the communities have to say about the proposals, about what is coming to them, about the growth that they are going to see in their community, their anticipation. There are definitely some levels of anxiety that we're going to have to quell in communities. And it is going to take a lot of communication and understanding on both sides as to what all of this means. We are looking at something that is unprecedented again, in that this is such a tremendous opportunity for all communities to play a part in what they want in their community, and also realizing the necessity that this has to happen as well. So it's a tremendous opportunity, and yes, hopefully they will work together. That's our hope.
You talked about.
Councilmember Sanchez would like to.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add to the speaker's response regarding there not being mandates in this legislation and whether that should be considered in the future. And I just want to point us to the history of planning in New York City and in the region has been conducted by civic groups, has been conducted not only by government agencies, but by many entities that don't have the authority to require a mandate. And those plans, although they were not required and there were no sticks, they came into play when there was government funding available. The first regional plan by the Regional Plan Association in the 20s and 30s, has been credited with a lot of the physical development of the New York region. They were not a government entity. And so there's a big and important role that legislation that requires planning has in the physical development of our city, and this is a really groundbreaking piece of legislation for our city to be considering and voting on today.
Speaker, you talked about quelling anxieties in communities that have been resistant to building. I guess why do you think there are those anxieties, and how do you overcome those? I mean, a lot of places have been very resistant to building new housing. You saw this with the Bruckner rezoning, just had consequences for Councilmember Velasquez in her election. So, yeah.
Well, again, as a former chairperson of a community board for a very long time, I can attest to the fact that information traditionally has been brought to the community on a plate and saying, here, eat this meal, where the community has not had any input as far as the ingredients on that plate. So what this legislation aims to do is give our communities an opportunity to participate in creating that meal. That's something that has not been done before, and I'm a witness to that, being as one who has been served that meal repeatedly in the past. Thanks.
If I could just ask you to talk more about this Mayor's City of Yes plan. I know you said you have more community outreach to do, but just from what you've heard, if you can speak for yourself or if you've heard from your members, are there parts of the plan that you like or parts that you're not sure about?
Yeah, sure. There are parts of the plan that I like. The thing, and I'll just mention the hurdles that are going to have to be overcome in the proposal. And again, the hurdles are there because communities are not monolithic. Every community has its own characteristic, its own style, its own way of acting and reacting. So again, the key to all of this is going to be communicating, understanding what it is that the proposal means, understanding what the proposal aims to create in the districts, and again, listening to the input of the community is going to be vital to any of this being successful, be it this legislation or the mayor's proposal. Thank you all very much.